Elyssa will pet an Alakazam. Maria will dance with Anna, the virtual Web3 human. Tammy, I'm curious what we come up with, but those are going to be hard to top.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Metacast Roundtable by Naavik. You should listen to us weekly to stay up to date with all the latest game business news and how they impact the future of games. And if you enjoy this content, you know it, I'm going to say like and subscribe so that we can reach a broader audience. Today I'm joined by Aaron Bush, co-founder of Naavik, Tammy Levy, Chief Games Officer at Krafton TV, and Elyssa Goldberg, Head of Growth at Powder. Hey everyone.
Hello.
Howdy.
Hey there.
Aaron, where's your enthusiastic hello this week?
I gave a howdy this week. Was that not good enough? My hellos are getting critiqued left and right. Man.
It was pretty good. Elyssa, thanks for joining us for the first time. And anytime someone joins us for the first time, I like to ask a question. And that's what's been on my mind, is to understand what people like to pet in game. So if there's one animal, any animal, it can be a fantasy animal or a real animal, which animal would you pick to pet in a game?
Okay, so I gave this one a lot of thought, and I realized that I had never actually played a game in which I was able to pet a pet inside of the game. But what? I will say that, I know, but my love of games was first cultivated with many, many years and many generations of Pokemon. And I think that for me, I'm sure there's something to unpack here in therapy about wanting to pet an Abra and a Kadabra and an Alakazam over time, just because they were my most loyal teammates. But I should probably pick something cuddlier, maybe like an Eevee or something like that. I like things that are round and fluffy like everyone else, but I also like loyalty.
Wow. That's such a good answer.
That's a deep answer. I love it.
There is a lot to unpack here.
Petting an Alakazam, man. I was not expecting that.
I don't know if I'd survive, but I would try.
I mean, if it's all about loyalty, I think you're good.
The loyalty test, a hug. All right, well, we're going to dive into some updates before going into the discussion topics. The media topics we'll be diving into are Nintendo's earnings and some predictions about their strategy, and also discussing with Elyssa leading the topic, what's the evolution of community play? So if everyone's good, I think I'll just kick off the updates because I'm the first one. Okay. So very quickly, I looked into Unity's earnings. It has been earnings season. The past 2 episodes are about earnings, and this episode is also about earnings. So Unity landed very close to expectations, which was supported by lowering the fiscal year guidance last quarter, and that has led to growing confidence that Unity's rate of growth is expected to accelerate. The revenue increased 13% year over year. However, their operations solutions, that includes their ad tech, declined 7%. This is mainly from the ongoing ad algorithm issues that they've been suffering. So Unity has a history of struggling to rein in their expenses, but with the recession and post-pandemic decline, it's going to be harder to get away with this. I think, Aaron, you have some thoughts on this earnings update?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line, in my opinion, really for any company, is that when revenue growth slows, your losses heighten and dilution accelerates all at once. It doesn't matter how incredible your tech is, you're still getting whacked and destroyed in the market, right? And maybe that'll improve from here for Unity. It kind of has to. And the hope of that promise is what turbocharged the stock this past week. It was up like 50% this past week. But, even with the merger with IronSource, which also just closed, that deal's coming from a position of weakness on both sides for macro and micro issues. So, the company will probably get more profitable in the near future from Unity's lens. And yeah, the operate solutions weirdness will largely dissipate. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that there's a lot more work to do for this combined company to really level up its execution, streamline its costs, because having 74% of revenue be in losses and half of revenue just be like, taken back by stock-based comp. That's ridiculous. And, they just largely need to reset and be better and more streamlined coming out of this bear market. So hopefully they can do that. But the numbers were pretty darn ugly, in my opinion.
I think that will tie nicely into Tammy's update about NewZoo.
So quick update, NewZoo updated their forecast this year for, I believe it's the third time. And, with all of these earnings reports coming out, they've had a lot of data to dig into, as we all have, and they forecasted a down year for the gaming market for the first time. So as I mentioned, they released their annual kind of forecast for the whole gaming market in terms of players, revenue, etc. And in May, they had estimated over 200 billion in revenue for the gaming segment sector this year. They lowered that in July, and they just lowered it again to a decline of a little bit over 4% year over year. So a couple of notes behind this downward revision, because it might sound like gloomy, like, oh, now the gaming market might be shrinking. It's actually kind of like a very interesting story to unfold, because it comes from a lot of different little pieces here and there, where PC games are relatively flat right now. It's definitely a slower year for console games, so they're contributing to this decline. And that's combined between game releases delayed and hardware shortages. So there's less consoles being sold. On the mobile side, we kind of have gone in depth and at length on all the trends in the market, but the market has changed significantly, including the IDFA changes, which also impacts the expected revenue from mobile games and how mobile games are performing. Region-wise, China has also been cracking down on mobile games, being one of the biggest sector. That is also contributing to the decline. And we see North America and Europe also with a smaller decline being forecasted. So it kind of just adds all of the different pieces in, resulting in this forecast of a down year for the gaming industry. But when you kind of take a step back and zoom out, the correction, it looks more of a correction in the industry trajectory. So we had really, really good years in 2020 and 2021. We had booms with the pandemic and just, the market, like the segment really growing. So if you look at what NewZoo was forecasting before the pandemic, 2022 is actually going to end up right around what they had forecasted before the pandemic. So it feels much more of a correction. Not saying that, we don't have all of these other external factors and, recession and all of these other pieces that are going into it, but it's more, it's a story to unpack, and it's not just that the industry is shrinking.
Yeah. Do you think the correction came in too late though? Like third quarter of the year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. And I think that there was still a lot of optimism.
Go ahead, Tammy. I cut you off.
I think there was still a lot of optimism from a bunch of companies putting their guidances for the year, right? From, companies on the mobile space feeling like they were not going to get hit as hard. Companies in the PC and console space expecting to launch their games and getting delayed. I don't know, just thinking through, are there any other factors? But I think it's coming late, kind of from that point of view in terms of like companies' expectations, plus the recession really starting to stress test this idea of, are games recession proof or not, which I think they're recession resilient, but not recession proof.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway I think your analysis is right, but the main takeaway from NewZoo's revised forecast, in my opinion, is less about the market, which has been this way all year, and more that NewZoo just did a horrible job forecasting. In their previous revised 2022 forecast from July, they were still forecasting that mid-single digit growth in mobile, when in Q1 and Q2, though the mobile results from those quarters, they were already out and very, very much down for obvious reasons. So, not only was NewZoo wrong in their forecast initially, but it took them 11 out of the 12 months of this year to figure it out and change. So to me, that's crazy. Yeah. It's kind of a joke.
What was surprising for me is like the quick revision, right, of like May, July, and then November. And they're like big revisions. They're not like small tweaks here and there. I definitely agree with your take of like, hey, it's ridiculous that it took them this long to figure out like the trend.
Yeah, maybe we should stop listening to NewZoo. It's sort of my take on all of this.
Yeah, I was really impressed. I didn't realize when Call of Duty released Modern Warfare that they were going to release an entirely new Warzone. I thought they were going to update Warzone with new content, but I didn't realize it's a complete 2.0 on a new engine. It's just very impressive, and I'm keen to see the results of how much impact it has on Warzone in keeping up with the technology and the improvements that the other titles in the franchise are doing.
I have a quick question.
It feels like a franchise approach, right? And sorry, to cut you off. Yeah, it feels like a franchise approach where they're going all in on it. They've built this common engine for Call of Duty Modern Warfare. Warzone is powered by the same engine that released today, I believe. And then Warzone Mobile is coming up next year, and it's also built on that same engine. So it's definitely like very bold and all in.
Yeah, we can all look forward to the 100 gigabyte download to get home to later on tonight. Elyssa, sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask everyone, I mean, do you think that it's that the forecast was poorly done and not done soon enough? Or do you think that it's just getting more difficult to accurately predict the trajectory of the gaming industry if it's increasingly more hit driven the way that, TV and film is, or music is, where there's a huge gulf between huge successes and big blockbusters and kind of more, everything else?
I think that NewZoo was generally right with everything except for mobile. And on mobile, they were just like, I don't know how they were so wrong. But forecasting growth when for at least 2 quarters, all you see is declines, that makes no sense. I mean, I do think it gets tougher when more like structural changes happen, like, Apple changing the rules, and it gets harder when, COVID whiplash happens and you're figuring out what is an acceleration, like a long-term acceleration versus like a pull forward from the future. And those things are hard to forecast around. But yeah, for the sake of this, it was just NewZoo was really bad with mobile. It's sort of my bottom line.
Fair enough.
We'll jump into then AppLovin's earnings. So they reported a revenue of a decline of 2%. Their apps revenue declined 24% as they continue to optimize the portfolio of apps to drive higher cash flow. This is a quote from their earnings. And this is mainly due to a decline in consumer revenue from Project Makeover and Matchington Mansion, their first and second highest revenue generating games. So I used Data AI to go and look at their other portfolio games that drive key revenue, and they're also in decline. The only exception that I saw is Cash Tornado Slots that managed to maintain a relatively stable revenue this year. We can also see that Project Makeover's revenue decline on iOS is sharper than Android, which matches the game's much sharper decline in downloads on iOS. So I'm assuming that considering a percentage of the revenue is driven from iOS, the impacts of ATT are being exacerbated for AppLovin. So I think AppLovin is facing a challenge of developing and scaling new hit mobile games because their top performers are starting to reach product maturity and they have to renew their portfolio. And I think trying to do that in an environment where there are exacerbated impacts of ATT on iOS Additionally, AppLovin is reducing UA budgets so that they can focus on profitability over revenue, and that affects the downloads that you can get. So I'll be really keen to follow if their R&D investment of entering the connected TV market for their advertising solution, if they can carve out a new market there as we start to see some subscription and streaming services offering ads for lower price tiers. Well, we'll have to keep an eye on the new hit games that they can produce. All right, Roblox earnings. So the Roblox earnings were analyzed by Naavik's free newsletter, Naavik Digest. So if you find this valuable, you can sign up to the free newsletter. I'll just quickly run through the high-level takeaways from David Taylor's analysis. So there were higher than expected losses due to operating costs, primarily headcount, being higher than expected as Roblox hired around 600 new employees in the last year. So Naavik's conclusion from the third quarter earnings call is that Roblox is executing on its focus areas despite the suboptimal macroeconomic environment, because they're still trying to capture the strategic opportunities that we've laid out in previous episodes, such as the audience aging up and also investing in new opportunities for monetization. I don't know if, you saw that now they have these wearables that can adapt to any kind of character form. It was, pretty cool. So the 13%, the 13 plus cohort grew by 34% from a year ago, compared to the overall DAU growth of 24% year over year. So their investment in trying to cater to an older audience is paying off. There are also brands who commission Roblox developers to implement their experiences, which ends up funding and investing in trying to get more games and other experiences onto the platform. The bookings growth has slowed, but we've seen slowdown across the games industry. But looking at Roblox's DAU, of the audience growth, the monetization opportunities, I think we should expect bookings to take off when the macroeconomic environment improves.
And it will also come in as their audience is aging even further. So if they're able to retain their core audience and their core demographic, it feels like they're setting up themselves for really, really strong growth.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, which I think is important because I guess, obviously it's good to see the user growth aging up. I kind of wish it would translate to better business, but they're obviously still held back by, App Store take rates and just the structure of that. But if you look big picture, I think the main thing to emphasize is that it's really critical that Roblox makes the most of the moment it's currently in, meaning that there's a window between all the acceleration benefits COVID gave them and the inevitable rise of competition. And right now they're kind of in this sweet spot where they don't really have big competitors that do what they do. And, Roblox's largest competitive advantage, besides its network effect of users and developers right now, is its R&D budget, which is about to tip a $1 billion run rate. and that level of scale of reinvesting is something very, very few companies can match. So, I think it's hypercritical that they reinvest appropriately to best age up, capture ground, and future-proof themselves from what others, probably mainly Epic, eventually spin up in the next couple of years. I don't really know how well they're reinvesting, but, if in a couple of years the narrative, it might change to being one of renewed competition, which will then be more expensive to compete on in other ways. And so what they do right now ultimately has the largest impact on what happens then. So I don't know. I'm curious to see how that narrative plays out. But for now, I think it's mainly important just to look at their speed and quality of execution and being able to level up the platform and, what that means for capturing and retaining users while doing so. And so far that seems to be pretty good, but I guess we'll see how that translates to business and the fact that they've been hiring so much when other companies have, been kind of leaning the opposite. I'm curious if that'll continue to be the case. But I guess we'll see over the next probably a couple of quarters.
Yeah. And I don't think there's signs of them slowing down on hiring and staffing as opposed to other, just the broader tech industry slowing down or even shrinking. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they execute in the next couple of quarters and where they're at.
Yeah. I just look because I think they're their people expenses, they rose like 50% over the past year, but their bookings, for this last quarter were only at 10%. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. So yeah, I'm curious to see how that goes. But yeah, ultimately, if that's what it takes to build a platform that can compete for a very long time, I think that's probably the right decision.
Okay, Elyssa. Yeah, on to FTX's impact on gaming.
Oof. Okay, to start, I think that sound, that groan is exactly what we've all been following, like tabloid drama over the last couple of days. It feels like FTX is a big black hole that's been sucking everything in its orbit into it. But just for how it's been interacting with gaming. So first, of course, there was the FTX gaming division unit that had about 100 million to deploy, but that was operated through its US affiliate, FTX US. And that's not really implicated, partially implicated in all of the drama going down. But the rest of the operations, and in particular, FTX Ventures and FTX, the exchange, were very tightly tied to several game studios, the esports teams, and to various blockchains. So just for a ballpark, FTX Ventures since the beginning of the year had made 47 investments into games and like Web3X gaming projects like Axie Infinity and Mythical Games and Faraway and Star Atlas, and had also purchased Good Luck Games. And as soon as the news dropped a couple days ago, Star Atlas, kind of one of the most hotly anticipated AAA Web3 games that should be pretty exciting. And full disclosure, is one of our partners at Powder, is one of the most affected among the studios. They announced that their runway was reduced by one half. In a statement put out by their CEO, Michael Wagner, who was saying that they had material cash exposure, in particular because they had put some of their treasury into low risk yield accounts. That's their words, on the hope that it would generate 4 to 5%. Immediately, their own token, Atlas, was down over 98% on the weekend. Star Atlas had been, very, very transparent, but really very wild to see as they kind of go into a strategic fundraising round. And it's easy to imagine that there are other startups and games in the same position, but it's really not clear who yet, because maybe everyone is kind of like counting, doing their own accounting and chatting internally about what the next steps might be. In the esports world, FTX had made obviously a very public deal with TSM. It was a 10-year and $210 million deal. To date, they have FTX had 168 million left to pay out that TSM will likely never get. And, I think that it was already hard enough in a lot of ways for the esports community, for gamers to align with Web3 in the first place. And I can imagine that it would be tough to get these kinds of sponsors on board into the future. Also in esports, FTX had sponsored the biggest North American League of Legends league, LCS. It was the premier crypto sponsor. It was on the scoreboard of every LCS game. And that sponsorship was supposed to last until the end of the 2028 LoL season. FTX was also involved in Furia and Nerd Street Gamers. They had a lot of money in Solana, which is a super active gaming blockchain, which is all to say that while, FTX wasn't, it wasn't a gaming company, it wasn't necessarily explicitly interested in gaming. It was interested in gaming as a way to onboard people to crypto who would then keep their money on FTX and do God knows what with it. So as far as what does this all mean? Companies that were directly in business with FTX have to all put out statements of how exposed they were and what damage was done. And this is gaming developers, this is investors, this includes ones who, haven't been vocal yet, maybe. The market has, of course, recoiled and is spooked. This probably means that any Web3 gaming project will have a harder time of fundraising in the next few months and will also as the fundraising climate becomes more and more difficult for projects like that, we'll see the death of many companies who raised in 2020. And it's not clear whether they'll go out with a whimper or a bang. We'll see. And then, I think it's a real sink or swim moment in the kind of investors versus gamers, in, cryptocurrencies versus blockchain. It kind of encourages people to take a stance on what could be potentially interesting for gaming long term versus what's kind of a passing fad, what's for speculators, and what's like the underlying technology about digital ownership and transfer of assets and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really unfortunate to everyone who has losses due to what happened. At the end of the day, I'm still quite positive about what it means to the environment, to the space of Web3 gaming, because it's just so bleeding edge that when we have challenges, when we have deep rooted problems, it helps shift into a better direction in the long game. So I'm expecting that actually, once we get over all of the consequences, I think the impacts are still not fully known, like you described. I think at the end of it, we'll just be in a better place and we'll have more direction into what makes a sustainable Web3 gaming economy. And not just gaming, but just crypto in general.
Yeah, for me, I think it's just that the process of rebuilding trust with consumers is going to take a long time, and that has a bigger impact than whatever games FTX as an investor had, or what companies stored money on FTX. So I mean, yeah, the rebuilding of trust point is the major thing to kind of work through. I sort of doubt it'll have an oversized impact on blockchain gaming as a whole, mainly because for the most part blockchain gaming already imploded before FTX did. And that sector's it's already going through a soul searching reset. And at the end of the day, 95% of what matters there is just, can these Web3 games teams build awesome and entertaining games that people want to play at scale? And that's a factor that teams are much more fully in control of and shouldn't be overly as influenced by or affected by outside events like exchanges and whatever else goes on. But to the extent that it impacts trust and just kind of tarnishes the branding of Web3 and what people feel comfortable doing with their money, it could have some type of impact to work through.
I would challenge that a little bit, because I think that there's people who have put money into Web3 or people who are not the consumers that don't understand quite Web3 just yet. So I think that there's some optics to manage and some trust to rebuild, but I don't think it's going to be a deep rooted trust building with the consumer space. I think it's a big shakeup, especially around just funds that teams have available at their fingertips. Of course, teams that and companies that had made deals with FTX, and we're expecting that funding to come through and materialize, and it's not going to happen. I feel like where we're seeing some kind of just extra damage across the Web3 ecosystem is teams that might have had good products and could have delivered really good games and really good products. If they partner with the wrong partner, they're in along for the ride of not being able to execute. But ultimately, it's kind of shaking the tree and see who had the secure funding and the right ideas. We're starting to see that already with games and the broader Web3 ecosystem. I feel like we're at that place where it's just shaking all over and see who can withstand the storm.
And then talking about storms, last but not least, I'll dive into the Krafton's earnings. So I cut this in half because I got really excited doing this research. I was doing a bunch of earnings analysis and I went into a rabbit hole and I fell in love with Krafton. So I didn't expect that in my night. So just as a reminder, I know, statement of love right here live on the Metacast. So yeah, reminder, the PC and console version of PUBG Battlegrounds, it went free to play in January, and the Switch landed an impressive MAU and sales growth. They're still living on that tail off and trying to dig into it further. In terms of the earnings results, so revenue unfortunately declined 17% year over year, as PUBG's mobile's revenue is down 26% year over year due to Battlegrounds Mobile India ban and also the general mobile gaming headwinds. So you can see that there's just a common theme across all of the earnings this quarter. The impacts of PUBG Mobile are extremely significant for the overall performance, because if we go back to Q1, that game was responsible for 75% of Krafton's record high revenue. They continue their efforts in trying to repeal the India ban or the delist, but there are some key hires from their India operations that have left. So people are getting more and more skeptic and uncertain if they will ever be able to be relisted. And reportedly, 55% of PUBG Mobile's revenue in H1 22 came from China. So we spoke a little bit about China's macro environment, and we'll have to keep an eye out to see if it affects Krafton's performance in the following quarters. Unfortunately, as well, I looked into the results of PUBG's mobile-first new state game, and yeah, unfortunately, it's just not performing well. There's a declined combined monthly revenue that's about 500K nowadays. And looking at a company like Krafton and the other titles that they have in PUBG, it's just very low. But yeah, hopefully the devs. Sorry?
Which one was New State? What was that game for?
It's for mobile. It's imagine PUBG Mobile, but actually built mobile first, where the core loop is shorter, the maps are smaller. Yeah, it's trying to reinvent it from the ground up.
And replace PUBG Mobile, or
I don't think so.
Interesting.
Confusing. I think it's too. Yeah, I found it a little bit confusing as well. Maybe that's why it didn't find a market. It's not different enough to pull the players. But then they'll also be cannibalizing PUBG Mobile's game. I'm not too sure. I have to look into it more. Lastly, their operating profit, it declined significantly year over year, also due to personnel costs growing to deliver Krafton's ambitions, and also increased spend overall for the new global launches that they have, mainly the Callisto Protocol. It's a PC console game that's releasing in December this year. I did follow up with the games I'm so excited that they're developing. Does anyone have anything to say on the earnings before I go in hype mode?
I want to hear the hype mode.
Yeah, that's the part I'm waiting for. What are you excited for that's not PUBG Mobile?
So they have a new major studio in Canada that's going to do an adaptation of the Bird That Drinks Tears fantasy novels. It's inspired by Korean mythology. It looks like dark fantasy. It's going to be a transmedia project. And if you look at the concept trailer, it looks so cool. I love epic dark fantasy, so I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for that. Additionally, the Unknown Worlds, who are developers of the Subnautica series, they announced Moonbreaker, that is officially entering early access, and it is a turn-based competitive tabletop tactics designed with digital miniatures. And the best thing that gets me excited is that the sci-fi universe was crafted by Brandon Sanderson. I don't know him. He's a really popular fantasy book author, and he wrote my favorite fantasy series of Stormlight Archive. So imagine that with miniatures, with an amazing studio.
The art looks so rad. I love it.
I'm so excited, and I also know what book series I'm going to be reading all winter.
So, if you like fantasy, Stormlight Archive is superb. Highly recommended to everyone's Christmas periods and holidays. And then lastly, we talked about games, but then Krafton's also developing a hyper-humanistic virtual human called Anna. And Anna is, I think, just an experimental testbed where they're trying to create this digital person who has a band. I think looking at how Krafton has been approaching collaborations, they had a whole Blackpink music video that was filmed within PUBG. I think it's really impressive to see a company that is diving into these avatars and trying to create digital people, really. but then it really dives into their core strengths that can be applied to their games and further leveling up these experiences. Yeah, but if you haven't seen the music video, I also recommend that. It just looks so cool.
So is Anna actually like it's not creepy looking
No,
virtual human?
she looks so cool. I really want to be her friend and go dance with her. Like, she really looks fun.
So is she more of like a VTuber, or is she more of like an avatar? I'm also trying to understand like what the Web3 tie-in is, where Anna lives, where she's going to be.
I think we're creating this has become a tabletop RPG podcast, and we're going to create Anna's backstory. Okay,
we're getting some good stuff though. Yeah, Elyssa will pet an Alakazam. Maria will dance with Anna, the virtual Web3 human. Tammy, I'm curious what we come up with, but those are going to be hard to top.
Well, maybe the Nintendo earnings will take you somewhere.
Will go give us some inspiration.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, yes, the final earnings of the day. Earnings season is always a tsunami, so there's always so much to talk about. But yeah, let's talk about Nintendo. So in short, sales were up 5%, net profits were up even more. But that's actually pretty overstating things because the yen has weakened versus the dollar. So the cleaner view to understand the business is just to look at unit sales of the hardware and software. And from that lens, hardware unit sales of the Switch were down 19% over the past year. And software, the game unit sales, they were basically flat, up like 1.5%. And, you know, that's normal just as the install base of the Switches grows, which is now over 100 million. And similar to other consoles these days, the story is really just the same. There are supply chain issues, mainly semiconductor shortages, and that spurred the majority of that decline in Switch sales. And because of those shortages, Nintendo lowered its fiscal 2023 revenue forecast downward. But like we have said elsewhere, all of these supply chain issues are short-term in nature. And what's more interesting than, you know, figuring out the little details of that is determining whether Nintendo's broader trajectory has changed at all. So we'll discuss that in a minute, and I'm curious what everyone thinks about that. But first, let me just walk through some other informative tidbits from everything that happened in the earnings announcements. And one thing to call out is, you know, now that the Switch is 6 years old, 30% of Switch purchases recently are now additional systems, meaning that there's a growing trend of multi-Switch households. And that's something that we saw historically with handhelds like the Game Boy and DS, but not consoles. So that's very much a positive for Nintendo's strategy today. And it's good to see, you know, that little extra growth catalyst get unlocked there. And obviously on the hardware side, Nintendo continues to drive different SKUs. There's the original Switch, the Switch Lite, now the OLED model, and in aggregate, those are attractive to a wider range of people than if they just had one model. And all of that, you know, has built up to a couple notable things. One, the number of active Switch users continues to grow. It just hit 106 million over the past 12 months, which is up 15% from the last year. And second, at least in my view, it's pretty obvious that Nintendo's hardware strategy today is basically what it's going to be going forward for many more years. It's just going to be more of the same. And there will be more upgrades and variety in order to draw more first-time purchases, replacement purchases, and additional units per household. But it'll still, you know, just be more of the same. And, you know, compared to the past, there are software benefits from this too, because now Nintendo can build around one consistent device platform instead of splitting games among different consoles versus handhelds. And that isn't new, but it's working well with their top IPs, and they've gotten better at add-on content related to that too. And it also helps building on one platform when creating a singular online subscription service. And Nintendo Online now has 36 million members, and so that has been a tailwind for them as well. And lastly, Nintendo, this isn't new, but they continue to invest in their IP outside of games. Super Nintendo World has been open in Japan for a while. It's the version in the US at Universal Studios is opening in 2023. They have a ton of branded merchandise, like always. The Mario movie is coming out next year, so that'll be interesting to see how that does. And none of that really moves the needle financially in like a long-term kind of way, but it does reinforce the brand. And Nintendo's goal with all of these things is just to drive people to the Switch and want to engage with these brands even more. So the bottom line, looking at this, and then I'll hand it over, is that, you know, temporary weak Switch sales aside, Nintendo is in a solid position. And in a time when mobile and many other businesses are fundamentally struggling, that has appeal. And elements like getting better at digital add-ons and Nintendo Online, plus doing more with IP, all of that is good to see, and it adds some growth around the edges for Nintendo. But that said, I don't think there actually is that much in terms of interesting stuff business-wise. Nintendo isn't really leading the future of games. As I said, the strategy is just going to be more of the same, more great games, and more types of Switches, which is fine. But this isn't a business that really seeks out big new growth opportunities. And it doesn't really use its $8 billion in cash super effectively other than paying a dividend. So my prediction is that in the same way that Nintendo has gotten more niche over the past 10 to 15 years because it sticks to the same approach while the rest of the industry expands and kind of builds around it, I think that's going to continue to be the case. And Nintendo will just be a good business, but more and more niche over time. So I'm curious what you all think. And I guess to start, do you think my bottom line is right? Do you agree that Nintendo's strategy will probably just be more of the same? And is that good or bad?
Can't wait to disagree with you.
Okay, hit me.
So looking back at the start of the history of Nintendo and how they've evolved themselves over time and conquered like the US market post Atari and just finding fun and building out their niche business, I'm always very impressed at how Nintendo, they carve out their own path. And it's special, you know, like the games of Nintendo are way more expensive than the secondhand games market, even in the other consoles. And yet people buy a Switch. A household has more than one Switch. People want to play Nintendo's games. And if we look at the history of R&D in the company, it's solid. All of the developments and evolution of their hardware and releasing the Switch, completely reinventing the handheld model of combining hardware and software. I think more is to come. So some evidence of that is looking at, I believe last year, they invested around 5% into R&D. And if we look at their earnings, they increased the amount that they're spending this year up to September compared to last year. They just made a purchase in Kyoto for a 12-story R&D center to continue building out their research and development team. That's only due to be ready in 2027. And in all of the analysis that I've seen, there is an acceptance that the Switch is entering product maturity and that they have to start investing in what will come next. So I do completely agree with you that what we'll see over the next maybe 3-4 years will be a continued strategy of the Switch and games and maybe even a new model for people to buy. I do think that they will impress us with what will come next. And just some additional evidence to that is looking at the other not games, but add-ons to the Switch that they've been developing. So they did this Mario Kart game where you build a track in your own house. And then you're basically playing with your Switch and you can see Mario driving through your house in a different perspective. And you can buy multiples of those. And then you can play together with your friends through the tracks that you build. And then additionally, they're also making VR somewhat more accessible with these Toy-Con products that they have, where it's all about getting people hands-on with the cardboard, building out the experience, and then actually experience playing with it. And there's one about this robot. Do you remember that movie where there's the robot that goes boxing with the human boxing? I don't know.
No.
It's with Hugh Jackman. It's a great movie as well. And it's, I think, seeing the other tech investment in R&D being more digital, you're more immersed, you're more closed off within this digital world. I like seeing Nintendo exploring how can we make how can we combine real life fun and interactability with the digital? And that's why I'm hopeful that we will see something exciting from Nintendo in 3-4 years.
My take on this is that it's a little bit somewhere in between of like Nintendo is going to be Nintendo and Nintendo is going to do what Nintendo is going to do. I think they're going to continue in that strategy. So kind of like broad strokes of like more of the same. I think it is part of their strategy. It's just they play it very safe until they have like a big, like something they can really bet on, like kind of like how we saw it with the Switch, right? So it's like they continue to really be very good executors on what they're doing at the moment while they're investing in the future. I am curious when, what that future is going to be, especially coming from, the success that they've had with the Switch, and, really finding kind of like that sweet spot of like a hybrid console and handheld device. So in terms of just like their hardware strategy, I think that it is going to be kind of, they're going to keep going as they are on the same until, they have high confidence on the next thing. And it's not just like a small, at least my hope is that Nintendo continues to deliver, and like it's not just like a small incremental update on their hardware, but it's like it's an evolution, which is what they've done in the past. So in terms of hardware strategy, I think it's kind of like a combination of both. In terms of games and just their IP, I think like they're just really good at continue to surface their IP and continue to leverage their IP, and that's what something like the Switch has been able to, like, they've been really doubling down and just getting more out of all of their IP. So I'm curious to see, what else can we see from Nintendo. I think like the more they put their IP in front of players and consumers, the more we want as consumers. And I don't know if they can move at that speed because they're also kind of slow. They move at Nintendo speed, I would say. So that's the flip side. I'm not sure they can keep up with demand on the content side, even as they've gotten better at incremental updates.
Yeah, and I think just one thing that I'm thinking about is I feel like Nintendo is the hyper conservative version of Disney in a lot of ways. And I think that, with a business like Nintendo or a business like Disney, right, you have your endemic IP, or you could then like acquire lots of other IP to then, funnel into whatever your distribution is, or you can find kind of more creative ways to distribute what you already have. And it feels like the Switch is a good bet as a way to distribute in the long term. But I tend to agree with Aaron in that it's not clear to me what if anything new will come out of Nintendo in the next couple of years, because they're not very acquisitive. They maybe they will keep finding new distribution channels for the Mario franchise or for something else. But at some point, it's like it can't all be funneled into Switch forever. So either they'll need some other way to distribute it or something else to distribute.
Yeah, that's all interesting. I think that the Switch form factor is just so good. Like being able to have the hybrid handheld and controller, it just works so well for Nintendo as a business, that the company's largest long-term risk, it always has been, it always will be, is them basically taking something that works and then launching something new that just flops. And you see, this is the history of Nintendo. It's a very volatile company where I forget, the Nintendo 64 did well, but then the GameCube underperformed, then the Wii outperformed, then the Wii U flopped, then the Switch did well. And it's just even if you look at the stock chart of something like Nintendo, it's just up and down, with the flows of the generations that worked and succeeded. And even today, I think the stock is below where it was at the highs of the Wii, just to give some perspective. And so the worst thing they could do is mess with what's working really well right now, that could be iterated on for a long period of time. And so that I would be worried about that. But yeah, at some point they'll probably make some type of change. I just, I would just be concerned that they that they screw it up again. But they have new management than compared to like the past and the the GameCube, Wii U eras, and so I'm more optimistic that the current generation of Nintendo leadership gets it, but we'll see. And obviously, like Maria, you mentioned, like they do a lot of R&D around like just random Nintendo things, and it's just so Nintendo to do that. But it actually, like, the funny thing about Nintendo is, like, they don't really seem to care about creating like value. They just care about creating, like fun experiences, and all power to them for doing that. But those things don't matter. Like they don't move the needle for the company at all. And if anything, they're probably distracting from other elements that could add much more value, like taking additional steps to improve their online services, or like higher subscription tiers, or create esports around, Smash Bros, or whatever. They just make little racing games in life, and like toothbrush games, things like that. So as a gamer, I appreciate all that Nintendo does to kind of push the boundaries. But as a business observer, that's the thing that makes me the most nervous. But anyways, I don't think we have anything to worry about there anytime soon. I have a feeling there's more Switch to come for a while. But yeah, at some point, whatever that next thing looks like, that's when I will start to get a little nervous. But besides that, Nintendo also has, it has a solid business, but it has always underinvested in and never cared about many emerging trends. And, mobile probably most notably. And as I mentioned, that mindset has made Nintendo more niche and just a smaller part of the games market than it used to be. And it seems like that's still their mentality going forward. And I'm curious what you all think about that. Do you like the fact that Nintendo is so focused and that it's holding them back from being bigger than maybe they could otherwise? Like when we see Xbox and PlayStation try to expand in new ways, or I'm just curious where you fall on that.
It also comes down a lot to organizational structure, because it could be that they're not jumping on the emerging trends, but mobile isn't really an emerging trend. It's a well-defined market. The whole leadership has to be bought in, and the organizational structure has to be there to take on an additional platform, because it has different needs. It has its own production, its own bets to make. And so I haven't fully made my mind as to whether this is a good or a bad thing from Nintendo. I do think it is wise. It is a wise business decision if they don't want to split their focus, and if they're passionate about the path that they're taking, to not jump into another market.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, and I agree with a good chunk of what you just said, Maria. I think that from the business perspective, you're like, you want to see more out of Nintendo. At the same time, they don't have the organizational structure to move fast. Like they've almost always played in a closed ecosystem, their ecosystem, at their timelines, at their pace, because they control the platform and the content. And they've, basically end to end from hardware to software. So them, having this organizational history of just playing in their own timeline, at their own speed, in their own terms, I don't think it would be a very deep organizational change to get them to. It's not only split focus, but it's like changing the culture from within to get them to play in a different way in additional markets.
Yeah. It's just questioning like what it means to be Nintendo, right? Like, and like what you stand for in your games, because it seems like with free to play, they just sort of refuse to play that free to play game and do what it takes to succeed, because it came at a cost of how they wanted to expose their IP. I kind of wish they would figure it out. They're not going to. And yeah, I have mixed views. As a gamer, I like it. As a business observer, I don't. But it just sort of is what it is. I noticed we probably should switch over to the other topic soon, but any final thoughts about Nintendo before we move to the last topic?
Yeah, my last thought was just going to be that I think that if there was tremendous consumer demand from millions and millions and millions of mobile players who wanted to play any number of Nintendo games on their phones, I'm sure they would hire some people to do it. I'm just not convinced that the like intersection of the demographic who loves Nintendo games, the regions in which mobile is super popular, the kinds of games that lend themselves well to mobile, and and then the development cycle for building and maintaining those kinds of games are all aligned. So I think it's something that I'm sure Nintendo has like given a lot of thought to and has decided against for reasons that like maybe we just don't know very well.
Cool. All right. Go, Elyssa.
Okay, so part of what I was tasked with looking into, partially because of what we do at Powder, is community play. And I know in the last episode of the Roundtable, Seb from Bitcraft mentioned that the trends that are bubbling up going into 2023 include generative AI, of course, but then also creative distribution relying on community. One thing that, the word community is bandied about again and again in gaming, both inside of the games themselves, in the platforms that support the industry. But community can mean a whole bunch of things. It could mean literally banding together to help solve problems. It can mean playing together for a common goal in multiplayer games. It could also mean playing against each other. But I wanted to kind of pose the question to everybody, what do you think the future of community building in gaming looks like? And, how can a community play together? What does that even mean?
I have strong thoughts and opinions.
I bet you do.
Because that's what I think of every day, pretty much. And very much on the nature of what we do at Captain TV. What we're building is games to play as a community. So it's games for streamers to play live with their community. A lot of what we think about is how do we enable streamers to build their community. So it is very much a question of like, what does it mean to be a community? What does it mean to play as a community? And what is that interaction within the community? In this case, we do have kind of the streamers. So there's also kind of like a different dynamic from, just like a community of folks coming together. We have that as well, but it's also kind of like this dynamic of like streamer and the rest of their community. I think that one of the things that really is very powerful for, from what I've seen in how streamers and their communities interact, and, when we think about like this community play, a lot of it, in the past, we've really relied in the gaming industry on our competitive nature, right? So it's like banding together against, someone or against each other even, right, within the community. What we tend to see more is people wanting to play together and like, coming together towards like just achieving a common goal in general. And that could be, being a boss in a dungeon. It could be, exploring a map or, whatever it may be. But I think that the collaborative portion of like, hey, together we make more than if we were playing on our own, that is really, really powerful from, what we see is how players come and interact with our games and on a, daily basis, and just like this need and this desire of like, we want to like support each other and kind of build each other and connect with each other. So for me, like just like community, it really means kind of like this coming together, this elevating each other. And it can look in like many different ways depending on like the platforms that we're talking about, like the games that we're talking about, and like how do you express it? I think that's what's fascinating of the space and exploring the space further, is how do we then kind of enable players, because players are going to be way more creative than when they get together than any of us in any one team. So it's like, how do we enable them to just like come together and like surprises as well?
Yeah, I think the future of community play is digging deeper into allowing players to create their own game experience. Game makers becoming more like dungeon masters, where instead of setting all of the details, penciling in the whole world, coloring it, you create the rules, and then you allow the community as they're playing either to build on top of what has been set as the rules, or creating this world that they have to discover together through lore, through tidbits, through hidden maps, through hidden experiences. I think we've gone from linear games to open world games, and I think the next evolution in that open world is the Dungeon Master games. Now, I think that what really excites me about blockchain technology is maybe some tech that allows us to do that. Maybe there are other solutions to go forward. But like the fondest memories I have are playing D&D, where it's a homebrew campaign, and for about a year and a half now, discovering all of the different elements of the world and building up my character that I really love. And I think being able to like slip into that character for 3 hours every fortnight is just such a mind relief from, I guess, the world and general life and reality. I think more and more people want to build their own character that is personalized, that they created in a world that they helped build through their storytelling.
I love the analogy of like the dungeon master, like, because I think about it as like, how do we enable communities to like express themselves? And I think like that's a very beautiful way of putting it. It's like, we're creating the world, and like now go at it, and they'll explore it in very different ways that maybe we would have never thought of.
Yeah, I sort of struggle to answer this question because the future of community is just going to mean so many different things to different people and in different circumstances, whether it's a community like in a game or around a streamer or around an esports team. So I sort of struggle to have like a pithy take, but I guess I'm just excited for like a wide range of things. Like we mentioned Web3, like that brings people together because of shared incentives. And that's something new. NFTs unlock some type of exclusivity tier in community. And that's something new to experiment with. I'm pretty excited about, massively interactive live events, Miles, just as another way for fans to come together around some type of event and have fun together at scale in a new way. I've been looking at esports, and Team Liquid. They have like a platform called Liquid Plus, which they basically built their own software platform for fans that connects to Discord and other platforms and kind of like tracks fan activity and gives rewards. And I think across more organizations, something like building your own platform that's cross ecosystem that kind of reflects what you want your fans to be and who they are. That's interesting. And then obviously UGC, enabling greater creation in the past and greater rewards in the past for building things for people to share, those experiences together, and better embedding that has a lot of potential to, increase the community in new ways too. So my head's sort of all over the place, but I guess in general though, like the breadth and pace of kind of the innovation is what makes me excited to be part of community, because all of these things sound fun and exciting in different ways and level up the experience of just being part of something.
Yeah, and I think for me, even in the last week, I feel like I've seen so many interesting and varied examples of community. Like it's a community, meaning people like giving part of their time and energy in order to contribute to a greater whole. Whether that's, we mentioned the Star Atlas example in FTX, where their gaming community in Discord was giving them ideas for how to extend their runway. And that's, being very transparent with everybody about the financial situation you're in. It's, like when a streamer says, I need to drive 100 downloads to my sponsor, and there's a ticker on the side so that the viewers know that they need to help the streamer, even if they're not opening their wallets themselves. And then I think, on Powder, where we have UGC clips, where we are able to give people rewards for winning quests and challenges across many different kinds of games, we saw, a kind of creative use of the platform this week, where one of our super users was grinding for hours and hours, winning rewards, and then redistributing them to his growing YouTube following. And it was such an interesting use case, also because then a lot of his followers were then trying to get rewards to then give back to him. Anyway, it's just a kind of a glimmer, as you had mentioned, Aaron, and also Tammy, about how many different iterations there are on community and the ways in which people like band together or, try to find some symbiosis between these relationships in gaming communities in ways that we kind of don't know where it goes yet.
Yeah, and I think what really just made, to close it up, what I really like about where as a whole the industries think about community is that, we've kind of gone through these cycles of like trying to distance ourselves from like the community that is building around your game, and kind of having kind of this wall between the community and the game developer. And that is, in some cases like that was very much what was happening. I feel like there's kind of this resurgence. Maybe it's because of the communities that I am seeing more these days, but I feel like there's a resurgence of like a much more positive interaction between the community, the players, how those communities are building up, and the game developers, and not kind of creating these walls between the two. Because at the end of the day, it's a relationship. Like you can't exist as a gaming industry or a game developer without the community that builds around your game, whatever that looks like and whatever that means. And vice versa, like the community, like, it's a two-way relationship. They need the team to be in a good spot so that they can continue to put out new games or new content or whatever it may be. So I think what's really exciting to me is also the much more positive kind of messaging and discourse around community and kind of bringing down those walls.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up the episode here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. So many topics, lots of interesting discussions. And you can find us on the Naavik Discord, sign up to the free Naavik newsletter. And again, if you enjoyed the content, if you can subscribe and help it share with other people. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.